Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Women's Health Unwrapped. It's great to have you joining for what I'm sure is going to be a brilliant conversation. One of the struggles I hear from so many women is around being able to stay consistent when they're trying to build healthier habits. And it can feel when you first start off that it's possible, you're determined to do it, you have some motivation, you've made that decision, you want to do the thing, and you get going. But then quite quickly, you're lacking in consistency. Now, this may be because you're not seeing results fast enough or because your motivation wanes, which I think we've all experienced, or because you just find it really hard, or maybe you've even forgotten what it is you're supposed to be doing. I know I've definitely experienced that with some of the health habits I've tried to put into place. Now, especially when it comes to improving your diet and fitness, consistency can be a huge barrier in the way to success. So that's what I'm diving into in this conversation with Lisa Franz, who is the owner and head coach at Nutrition Coaching and Life. So she's here to chat about this so we can help you get some real actionable advice and tips to stay consistent and achieve your health goals so that you can live healthier and stronger. So welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
Well, Nicola, thank you so much for having me on. It's a true pleasure speaking with you and especially talking about this topic, it just happens to be my favorite topic to talk about because without consistency, we can have the best plan, we can have the best intentions, and nothing is going to work or stick for that matter. And of course, that's what we want. We want our clients to see results and to maintain them. We're not much about yo-yo dieting or encouraging all or nothing mindset, which as you and I spoke about previously, just results into a negative relationship with food as well. So I'm really, really excited to talk about this. And the two biggest mistakes that I see people make when it comes to failing at consistency, I guess, is number one, approaching things too aggressively. Yes, you mentioned sometimes it is because we lose motivation if we don't see results quick enough. So that kind of contradicts that. But I actually see much more often that people are too aggressive with their approach, meaning, for example, they are cutting out complete food groups. They're saying, I'm going to go keto or whatever. And so, of course, then you go keto, you go carnivore, or you just say, oh, I'm not going to eat any carbs. And then your cousin's birthday rolls around and you're like, oh, okay, there's some bread, there's some cake. I don't want to be the odd one out. And also, I love it. So I'm just going to have some cake today. And then you quote unquote fall off the wagon and you think, oh, well, what's one day? I'm going to make it the whole weekend. I'll start back up on Monday. And here we are. And here we are entering this horrible cycle and this horrible sort of either I'm on the diet or I'm off the diet, as opposed to making healthy nutrition a lifestyle. So the mistake number one I see people make, and that pertains to anything, pertains to meditation, to training, to movement, as you call it, as well. Because if we're just thinking, oh, I'm going to go from 0 to working out 6 times per week, I'm going to go from 0 meditation to meditating an hour a day, we cannot stay consistent with that. It's totally unrealistic to have that expectation because life gets busy. We are entering a stressful time. The holidays roll around. We want to do life. We want to go on vacation. And then what do? We just stop it all together. So I think the main barrier that we can see when it comes to consistency really is to be too aggressive in our approach, as opposed to thinking what's realistic long time, even, and starting with that minimal effective dose and then building from there. So if you're not moving at all at the moment, making it your goal to just walk more, stand more, that kind of stuff, or maybe working out twice a week, and then building on that if you're able to be consistent with that. And if you're not able to be consistent with it, instead of just stitching it completely, just dialing it back down a little bit and then tweaking it from there and determining, okay, what can I actually work in to my busy day, or my, if I want to go on vacation, how can I not just think, oh, I'm not going to do anything at all and just eat whatever I want during that time? How can I still maintain a little bit of activity during that time so that I actually come back feeling just as great as when I went on vacation? Or how can I still hydrate my body and nourish it somewhat well on vacation and come back feeling great, as opposed to feeling gross about myself and thinking I need to enter the next, I don't know, aggressive dieting phase or whatever. So that's definitely the mistake number one that I see
Yeah.
people make. And I'll pause there before I go into step number two, so you can maybe add to that, or what you've seen with your clients as well.
Yeah, that is such an important one. It's something I do talk about often, in that I use an analogy of a mountain and say, we expect to get to the top of the mountain straight away. And if you were going to be climbing Mount Everest, which is obviously the biggest mountain, you wouldn't just get there and go, right, that's it. I'm off to get to the top. You'd have done months of planning, research, physical training, mental training, the route, the equipment, what you're wearing, going to eat, how you're going to sit. You would have put all of the pieces together to mean that you can gradually and successfully get to the top of the mountain. So we are going to get to the top, but we're just going to get there in the right way over the right amount of time. And I think we live in a world today where, and I'd love to dive into this actually before we go on to the next step, where we expect things to just be accessible immediately, this instant gratification. And I think that leads a lot of women to fail in their health results because, and often the health results they want are driven from a place of negativity. They don't like themselves. They want to feel happier, more confident, perhaps lose weight. Maybe they're struggling with their mobility and even walking upstairs, and they just think, right, that's it. Now I need to be fitter. I need this quickly and fast. And it can be difficult. But just before you answer that, what I always do at the start of the podcast, Lisa, is ask the guest about their most impactful habit. And I think this links nicely to you because you are about consistency, and a habit is something that becomes an automatic part of who you are. And so what is that one habit that gives you the biggest boost to how you feel? And, how is that something that you've embedded into your identity and who you are?
I think this might be similar to perhaps your most important habit. I don't know, but movement. Definitely
Mm-hmm.
movement, and not necessarily for the movement's sake itself, or not for the calorie burn, or not for the muscle build or whatever, but what it does to my mind and for the rest of the day as well, how I'm feeling with that. So essentially meaning, if I got my movement in that day, I'm so much more motivated to eat well on that day as well. I'm feeling like
Yeah.
I want to have a more upright posture. I feel more empowered, to your point especially. I feel like I want to go to sleep earlier because I'm exhausted from the day, and that's in a good way. I'm not like finishing my day in the sense of, oh, I didn't really achieve anything, or how if we actually work out less, we don't get as deep of a restorative sleep. So I think it affects every area of our life, down to mental clarity, down to our mood, like literally everything. And again, also to what you're preaching, it doesn't need to be going to the gym. It can also be going for a nice little walk or hike. It can be getting a yoga class, and it can be literally anything. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
moving the body, ideally also some fresh air, some daylight with that. I would say that is most certainly the thing that has changed my life the most.
And have you always been someone that exercised and moved your body?
No, also, maybe not. I did find exercise earlier on in my life than you did, perhaps, but I looked at it always more in the sense of sports, and like during high school and so on. And then once I finished high school, I gained quite a bit of weight traveling around and just stopping doing any kind of movement altogether, until I realized, okay, I probably need to watch what I'm eating, that resulting into some negative or some poor eating behavior. And as well with that, I started exercising specific, like more focused again. But yeah, I certainly was not always active. And I vividly remember the time I couldn't do a single push up. I couldn't do Most things that I'm able to do now, where most people think, okay, as you age, you actually get less fit, or you get more body fat or whatever. No, to anyone listening, it's never too late. Even they've done studies that even with people that have not done any resistance training, if they're starting in their 60s, 70s, you can still add muscle mass, you can still improve your body composition and your health, of course, your fitness levels. So it's never too late. It's never too late.
Yeah, and I love that. And actually, I've noticed over the past few months, obviously, I'm listening to lots of health podcasts, but that message is being shared much more kind of broader and convincingly with research of at any age you can make positive change around not just your physical fitness, but by doing exercise, also your brain health. Even in our 80s, 90s, we can still positively impact our brains. So yeah, lots of wins to take from it. And so what is your point then on your point of view on what I mentioned there about our just expectation to get the result really quick, and that means people have these really ambitious goals and desires off the starting block, and then they lose consistency because they're just not getting the results quick enough.
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I mean, first of all, I want to say that I don't blame anybody for having that attitude, because it is what we grow up with. It is, or at least most of us, it is what the media tells us. It's kind of like, you can lose 20 pounds in 6 weeks. Woo-hoo-hoo. So why wouldn't you want that, right? Like the message is not, yes, you can lose 20 pounds in 6 weeks, but you're going to gain it all back. And it's actually really unhealthy, but do it anyway. That nobody says that, right? So we hear that message and you see the wonderful pictures of before and after, and people telling you, oh, I feel so much better now. So why, if you hear that message versus someone saying, if you lose, like, I don't know, 2 pounds a month, that's a much healthier route to go down to. You should probably do that. I would buy that first message also if I had just that information, right? So I don't blame anybody, because I fell for those messages as well. And the other thing that, of course, our logical brain tells us is, if we see results quickly, it must be the right method. That's often what clicks in our brain. Of course, we now know, and my message is now that that is not true. But if we think, if I see results very quickly, that is the right way to go, right? And so that's why things like keto, like cutting out carbs and all of that is often so successful, or feels so good at first, because you can literally see the scale move so quickly and you feel lighter, but you don't think about, how is this going to be possible for me in 8 months? How is this affecting my body in 8 months or so? So I think for us as humans, it's really difficult to look further ahead as opposed to just next week. So yeah, I totally think you are hitting the nail on the head though. And there are so many quotes saying that, if we underestimate or we overestimate what we can achieve or should achieve in a month, and we underestimate what we can achieve in a year. So we should all be thinking more long term in everything, in relationships and financial investments and business enterprises. I think if we just think about what is this going to look like, or what where do I want to be in a year, or maybe in 10 years time, as opposed to just thinking, where am I in 6 weeks? And what's the rush, essentially, right? Like, don't we want to feel good for the rest of our lives, or do you just want to feel good in 6 weeks time, and then after that going downhill? So it is hard to rewire our brain for that. And that kind of like leads me into the second point of consistency, or second error that I see people making with consistency, and that is not setting their environment up for success, and also not getting the accountability that is often needed in order to be consistent. I mean, of course, I'm biased. I'm a coach as well as you are. So we believe in the power of coaching, but truly, what I have seen, not just with my clients, but in my personal life as well, if I have accountability, if I have someone who's counting on me, if I have someone to report back to, someone who is saying, hey, Lisa, did you do XYZ? Or someone who's saying, like, hey, I'm there with you along the way. I'm providing the guidance. I'm holding your hand for this. I'm checking in on you that you're doing it correctly. It has so much power. It has so much power, as opposed to if we're thinking we're walking this way on our own. We need to Google every single little method that we're unsure about. Should I eat this food or should I eat that food? Is it more important to eat carbs than it is to eat protein? Is it more important, or is it better to work out in the morning, in the afternoon? Like all these things where we're just like adding more stress on top of our already busy life. Why don't we outsource that to somebody else who does the worrying and the guiding for you, and who's always there, number one, and number two, who is checking in on you regularly? And for the people listening, I'm not necessarily saying you need to pay a coach for that. There are so many amazing online groups nowadays that you can join either for free or for very low cost. You can find a couple of friends that want to do this with you, and you're saying like, hey, for the next 6 months, let's just make sure we're all moving together, walking 2-3 times per week together, catching up in that way rather than over cake and coffee. You can still have that on occasion, but making maybe the walk your regular thing, exchanging recipes that way or whatever. If you have other people in your team, it's so powerful. And even down to the place of maybe motivating, or not motivating, but maybe asking your partner if he or she would want to come along that journey with you. And not from the place of, I want to change you, but from the place of, hey, I want to do this for me. Are you interested in, working on your own health as well? And if yes, that's amazing. If not, that's cool. Just letting you know, I'm not going to be drinking as much in the future. I'm not gonna, snack on the couch as regularly, perhaps, as I used to. I would appreciate it if you support me in this. So I think environment, and with that mostly also meaning the people, is so important. And something that you spoke about in our conversation earlier today was also that comes also down to the things that we're consuming in our mind. So the things we're listening to, the things we're watching, all of that matters when it comes to being consistent. Because if all I watch is food porn and I think about, like those kind of things, I'm going to be thinking about my next cheat meal, as opposed to if I'm watching, someone cook healthy recipes, or with exercise motivation, I'm so much less inclined to veer off my plan and ditch the consistency. So I think environment, every little detail matters so much in order for you to be consistent, or at least for it to be easier to be consistent.
Yeah, and that is one of the steps in my 7 steps to master building new habits, creating that environment. Because just say you are aiming to eat healthier for whatever reason that is, but then you have a glass jar of biscuits on the counter in the kitchen, and you can see it every time you go in to make a cuppa. And one of the things you've been trying to do is switch to herbal teas. So you're putting the kettle on, but then you see the glass jar of cookies. And this is a really simple example, but creating an environment that is conducive to what you're trying to achieve is really important to building that new habit. And as you said, the consistency is so important. And actually, let's maybe move on to that. Why is it so important to have consistency? Because this, and I know through my journey, has been a real struggle in the past. And like you, I see this with so many women who they're like, well, I did well Monday to Thursday, but then I was just so inconsistent over the weekend. And, we're talking obviously about reasons why that happens, but yeah, why on the flip side is being consistent something that will work in our favor?
Yeah, really, really great point, because sometimes, especially like in the poorer diets speaking, it was often even encouraged to have a cheat meal or a cheat day. It's totally fine, right? If you're super strict during the week, reward yourself, that type of thing. Again, resulting into negative relationship with food, number one. But number two, also being that we're often, quote unquote, undoing a lot of or all of the goodness that we've done beforehand. So let's just say someone is consistent Monday through Thursday, and then they go away on their weekend binge or whatever, Friday through Sunday. That's 3 days. And it's so easy to way overeat on calories and like to double, like people don't believe how much, if you're having five beverages and you're having, I don't know, a three-course meal, it's very easy to consume 3,000 calories in one sitting. And if you're dieting on 1,500 during the week, that's easily double in just that one meal. And so how sad is it to see all your hard work in from 4 days almost vanish in that 1 to 2 days? So you're ending up spinning your wheels in circles, and you feel like you're working so hard, but you're not getting anywhere. And so that is really the main crux of it, that unfortunately it's very, very easy to undo the hard work that you're doing and that you have done before by being so inconsistent. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't want my clients or want anybody to think that they need to be perfect. And again, another thing that we spoke about, because that is an unhealthy relationship or an unhealthy attitude and an unrealistic expectation. So what I much more encourage people to think is like, okay, what are the things that you really enjoy and want to incorporate more into your day? Like, what on those days where you're veering off or have veered off historically, what are the things that are bringing you joy? And if it's like, oh, well, it's the alcohol, okay, so how can we work one or two glasses in once or twice a week? That is something we can work with. But if it's like, I like the binge drinking, then we need to get to the bottom of why that is. Is that a coping mechanism for your stress? Is it because of a poor relationship or something else that you're trying to escape, and just kind of getting to the root of that? If it's something like, oh no, I can't stop with my chocolate or my ice cream. I love eating out of the carton in front of the TV. Okay, how can we fit that in a smaller portion, but maybe more on a regular basis, as opposed to thinking that food is off limit? For example, I love dark chocolate. I personally incorporate dark chocolate into my day, or any kind of chocolate, if you will, into my day on pretty much a daily basis. But because I allow myself, two squares or whatever every single day, I don't have the desire to binge on it completely. And that is often what I found. If people have completely denied themselves a certain food, they can do that for a certain amount of time, but then they go out and eat the 3 slices of cake, as opposed to just finding joy in sharing one slice with their partner once a week or so. And then it's not that off limits bad sort of thing, and that's usually followed by guilt. So incorporating things in moderation is really, in my opinion, so important to learn, and that's something we can practice. I sometimes hear, if I have a little bit of that, I need to have it all. And that's of course, obviously a limiting belief, because it's just a statement that you're telling yourself. So if you keep telling yourself that that's your reality, but if you keep telling yourself, no, I have the power to stop at any time, I can have 2, 3 spoons of this, then eventually that's going to become integrated and become your reality. But again, you need to practice that. And how do we practice that? Just simply by starting to do that, or by at least aiming for it on a more regular basis, without it being such a negative thing. So I would hope that kind of encourages people to move away from that all or nothing thinking, and just realizing that in anything, in my opinion, moderation really is the key. Therefore, I don't prescribe to cutting out anything altogether from your diet, unless you're really like allergic to something, or perhaps if you have PCOS or endometriosis, sometimes it can pay off to really minimize the sugar, really minimize gluten and dairy and those sorts of things. But those are specific scenarios, and I think aside from that, if we're having more of an all-inclusive look at things, you're much more, you feel a lot more food freedom than if you're limiting to yourself to the things of I cannot have that, and switching that into much more of what should I have more of. I should have more vegetables, I should have more protein, I should hydrate more. And automatically, if we eat more of those good things, we're going to eat less of the not so health conducive things.
Absolutely. And what I'm hearing from everything that you're sharing, Lisa, is so much of this is about mindset. It's about that, as you said, approach to what health means. And this is a big, big part of what I do, trying to help women understand what healthy living means. Hence the name of this podcast, Women's Health Unwrapped. I'm trying to unwrap what it means to be healthy, because the approach from so many women is that it's going to mean more restriction, denial. It's going to be difficult. It's something you have to do and probably only do for a block or period of time, and then you go back to normal, so to speak. But as you're explaining, this is about finding a new way in whatever it is you want to improve. So a new way of eating, a new way of moving your body, a new way of managing stress, and so on and so on. And helping to shift some of those beliefs that we have around what it means to be healthy, I think is so important to help be consistent, so reframing from the very beginning what it's going to mean to be healthy. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? And is this something you support your clients around?
Yeah, 100%. I love everything that you said just there, in the sense of shifting away from that negative attitude that we have towards a quote unquote healthy life. I do think one thing we need to acknowledge, or we almost need to give into, is that nowadays, being normal, eating normal, unfortunately means unhealthy. Uh, right? If we eat the quote unquote normal foods, the in the Western diet, like the starting your day with a toast and jam, and followed by the morning muffin, and then for lunch having your teeny tiny little your sandwich and crisps, and then the afternoon maybe another muffin, and so on. If we eat the normal things and do the normal things, as in being sedentary all day long, driving everywhere, we're going to get normal results. So while I say I'm a big fan, or I'm a proponent of moderation in everything, I do want people to acknowledge that in a health journey, we need to separate ourselves from thinking, oh, I just want to be normal, I just want to fit in. Because if you want that, you're going to be obese, and your chances of getting some sort of cardiovascular or whatever disease is very, very high. So it is going to take some discomfort in breaking away from what most people around you are probably going to be doing when they're encouraging you to binge drink, when they're encouraging you to just have pizza all the time, or to order your food or so. And that is often quite a tough realization for people to make, when it's like, okay, it's almost like a caterpillar, like morphing into a butterfly, right? When you're going through that transitionary period where you're breaking away from your old habits, from maybe some of your older friends as well. Sometimes it means separating from a certain friend group or so, and finding your new tribe, finding the new people that motivate you to be healthy, and so on. But in saying all of that, it's a beautiful development, right? If going from that caterpillar into a butterfly, to stick with that metaphor. But yeah, it can sometimes feel a little bit painful, sometimes feel a little bit lonely at first, until you find that new tribe. Nonetheless, if we stick with our goal, and if we're continuing to focus on the benefits that come out of it eventually, and also not just for ourselves, but what you do so beautifully as well, like for the future generations, for your kids, even your grandkids, or whatever, you're inspiring so many more people that you probably don't even know along the way. So just having that long-term focus, and thinking about how do I want to move, who do I want to be, what do I want to eat when I'm 70, when I'm 80? Do I want to be dependent on other people to carry my groceries, or do I want to be able to do that myself? Do I want to be able to play with my grandchildren, or do I have to watch them from afar because I can't move anymore? So if we keep the long-term focus on there, I think it makes it a lot easier to make healthier choices and to see them as something that adds quality to our life as opposed to something that limits our life just because we can't be quote unquote normal. And but in my opinion, normal should have a more negative connotation and healthy should have a more positive connotation, which unfortunately nowadays if we say I'm eating healthy, it's actually like the not the norm.
Yeah, I agree. I've used this example on the podcast before of when I've gone to do my food shopping and putting it through the till, and the woman on the till has said, "Oh, this is a very healthy shop." And I said, "Oh, yeah. I bet you don't say that to, other people when they've got an unhealthy shop." And she said, "Well, that's because most people who shop in here are buying all the unhealthy stuff. It's not often we see a shop
Mhm.
like this, just packed with fruits and veggies and some, maybe chicken and fish and so on." Because yeah, you're right, the norm, and it said 60% of adults in the UK, and I know it's greater in the US and greater again with kids and teenagers in both the UK and US. In the UK, 60% of the adult diet is made up of ultra processed foods, so it's very normal to have a diet mainly made up of poor, nutrient, low quality food. Something, as you were talking there, I was thinking about my framework that I use in coaching, which starts with why and getting really clear on why it matters to you. And as you were explaining about that view of looking forward and knowing the impact of making those choices today about your health and how you move and what you eat and so on, and what that's going to give you in terms of the reward further down the line. I guess this goes back to where we started with wanting results straight away, but actually a lot of the results, you will feel good in the short term for sure, but you're also going to gain a lot more longer term. And I think that's something that is so important to have as part of the overall goal setting process to help stay consistent, isn't it? Is that something you do with your clients?
Yeah, 100%. I think getting clear, being clear on your why, it really can help you in those tough times when
Mm,
life is busy, when you're tempted by immediate gratification or just even simply thinking, uh, I'm gonna give into that invitation, even though I shouldn't. And again, on that point, like sometimes if you have the question, should I be eating this food which is not so health conducive, or should I be having the alcohol along your journey? Sometimes the answer is going to be yes. What I want to encourage
mhm.
people to do is to make conscious decisions as
Yeah.
opposed to just doing what they've always done, or just supposed to, doing what is simply in front of them, or what they're being offered, but in the end feeling guilty about it. So it for me comes all down to making a conscious decision that allows you to feel good about the decision later on. And I think in order to do that, we need to practice mindfulness on a more regular basis when it comes to everything. And mindfulness is a term that's been thrown around so much at the moment, or I think these days in general, and often we associate it with meditation or things like that, when in truth, um, for me, it personally, it just really means taking out the speed of things sometimes, and also single tasking, because we're so used to multitasking. So we might be eating while we're driving, while we're halfway talking to someone on the phone. And like, let's look at these three things. Or all these things. You're not going to do any of them very well. And like to the point of food, your brain and your body are not going to register that well what you just ate there. You're not going to feel as satiated. It's not going to. You're not going to enjoy it what you're eating there so much. You're not processing it that well. So it has an effect down to your hormones. And so if we just focus more on single tasking and being like, okay, I'm actually going to park up my car right now. I'm going to take 3 deep breaths. and maybe even open a window or sit on a bench for a second and eat this lunch that I've prepared here for 5-10 minutes, because I'm worth it. I'm worth taking that extra time out of my day, eating that more slowly, and your body and your mind are actually going to register that you ate that. You're going to process it differently, and then maybe you can take that phone call while you're walking around for 5 minutes, helping your digestion further, helping your blood sugar regulation further, and then jumping back into your car and actually driving a lot more attentive as well. So yeah, if people want to take a couple of things from this podcast, this would be one that I really encourage you to do more: single tasking, and therefore practicing mindfulness in that sense. And we can do that literally with anything, in our life, becoming a little bit more in the moment. And that's also going to help you reduce anxiety, because you're not thinking ahead about all the 10,000 steps. You're not going to dwell on things in the past so much and contemplate that conversation that you just had at work that kind of like made you agitated or so. So yeah, being more mindful is going to help you on with everything in life.
Absolutely. You and I are so aligned on all of this. And I think one of the key things I really want to get across, and you've touched on this, is that we aren't approaching this from a lens of you have to be good and not be bad, and you must try and do all of this 100% of the time. You've touched on, it's not all or nothing, and it's not about perfectionism. What you said with the mindfulness and being intentional is really important. And that was something that I worked on with a coach myself a couple of years ago. Someone I know in this space was doing her coaching certification and wanted to volunteer. So I said yes, because I love to be coached. And I said, actually, one of the things that I would like to dig into is, why do I always want to drink alcohol on the weekend? And why do I always want to have cake on a Saturday as well? And, these habits that I've got, this belief that Saturday means and I do not use terminology like treats, but it's still there in deep rooted in my brain. And what came up through the coaching and as an outcome was being intentional about it. Like, I'm not going to give up alcohol. Not right now. I've cut back massively. I've never been a big drinker, but I definitely right now in perimenopause need to drink less than I've ever drank. However, it was about being intentional. And like you said, a lot of us are mindlessly choosing food or choosing to watch TV over moving our bodies or scrolling our phone rather than going to bed. This isn't just about what you eat. This can be about anything. So I really love how you've brought that up, because that is ultimately what it's about. It's not about, I have to stick to this and I'm falling off track. It's just, this is life. This is my normal. And my normal means sometimes I'm going to have the pizza and sometimes I'm going to scroll Netflix. Sometimes on a Saturday morning when I have the house to myself and my husband's gone to golf early, I literally lie for about an hour just scrolling social media. It might happen about once a month, but I love it because I've chose to do it. Versus sometimes when you go, oh my goodness, how have I been on there 20 minutes? I was supposed to be making the tea. But it's different when it's intentional to choose to eat something or take a break from a workout that you had planned because you don't feel that good, or whatever it might be. It just, I think that shifts it. And it feels like, from what you're saying, that we're not saying consistency has to be doing it all of the time. Consistency is living that way intentionally. I don't know, I feel like that's what I'm getting as a bit of a wrap up from what you're sharing.
No, you've summarized it so well. And I mean, those little times where we might not be acting intentionally, as you said, we don't want to feel guilty. I do sometimes have clients come to me and say, oh, last weekend, I fell back into old habits, and they're beating themselves up. And I'm like, actually, this is something you should be celebrating, because it's a sign that your old self is trying to pull you back, is trying to like show you that good old time once more. But simply the fact that you're realizing it, and simply the fact that you're already, quote unquote, back on the horse, as opposed to previously where maybe it was several months before you started back with your healthy habits, that is a sign of growth. And just the fact that you're not enjoying it as much anymore, those older habits that you used to do without even thinking about it. It means you're growing, you're pushing outside of your comfort zone, and that is such a wonderful thing. So if anyone listening to this sometimes feel like, oh no, I've taken some steps back, it feels like I'm not actually moving forward, yes, stay with it, stay with it. That's where the
Mhm.
biggest growth often happens.
Yeah, and you've touched on guilt a few times, and that's something which is a huge topic in itself. Again, it all comes back to mindset and those limiting beliefs. But moving forward from those feelings of guilt is really important as well to create that new normal for you. And
Hmm.
to leave those behind is very freeing, isn't it? And
Oh
and you've
yes.
you've been through your own journey of, as you mentioned, you'd put on weight, you struggled with diets. And so how did you shift away from, you know, being quite obsessed about what you eat to have that ease and joy and not have the guilt that many women do still struggle with?
For sure, and great question. I do think for me the key really was allowing myself to have everything. I'm someone, if you tell me not to do something or to have something, I want it even more. And so simply by saying no, technically you can eat everything. It just needs to be sort of the right balance and quantity. That for me was like, it sounds so logical now, but for me it was like an eye opener when I decided, okay, as long as, let's say, 80-90% of the foods and times that I'm eating is health conducive or is something that's really nourishing my body, the other 10-20% of the time, or of the food that I'm eating, if that's a little bit of chocolate here and there, if that's a glass of wine or so every now and then, it's not going to damage anything, especially not if it's feeding my soul. And so
Mm.
it really, for me, that was so liberating. And I have found the same with many of my clients who have often come from no carbs, or you mentioned low fat or something in that sense, just the very restrictive diets, restrictive thinking, and suddenly being like, okay, there's nothing wrong if I have a little bit of this and that from time to time. So I truly think that this kind of just simply allowance is often the breakthrough for many people. And also, again, if we are eating those 80-90% whole foods, we're going to feel so nourished. We're going to feel a lot more satiated if you get the right amount of protein, if you get the right amount of fiber from vegetables and all that already. There is a lot less room for cravings. You're not going to have those sugar spikes, the energy crashes that make you want to go for those more processed foods on such a regular basis. And to the point of food choices, I mean, so often it really is so habit based. And I'm sure you might have spoken about this on your podcast before, since you're so big into habits as well. But the book Atomic Habits is something that I often recommend to anybody starting out, or that just say, hey, I want to adapt this habit, or I want to ditch that habit. And while there many of the methods described in there seem so simple, they're so applicable and so easy to use. So for example, you mentioned the cookie jar. So even just having that exposure or limiting the exposure, sometimes it can be as simple as deleting a food delivery app from your phone, because the next time you're thinking about ordering food from a food delivery service, you have to download that app again, and that's like that extra step that's kind of standing in your way of doing that. And on the same side, if you buy healthy groceries and they're at home, you're much more likely to eat them. So than if you don't have them at home. So if we once go through the work of creating a healthy grocery list, healthy grocery cart if you're ordering online, the next time you're just clicking, okay, I'm going to order the same thing, as opposed to perusing the aisles and in a hungry state and just grabbing everything out of habit because you're just eating, or you're just shopping, stressed out after work, and you're too tired to think about what you actually want to buy. So often those little efforts of preparation go a really long way. If we have those healthy groceries in the fridge, or even prepared a few meals for the week ahead or so, often I hear, oh, I'm too busy, I can't meal prep. And I don't want everybody to have, every single breakfast, lunch, and dinner prepared in the fridge on Sunday. That's not what I'm talking about. But for me, meal prep on a Sunday or whichever day suits you simply means, okay, am I prepared at least for the next couple of days ahead when things are busy? And spending
Yeah.
those extra 20-30 minutes ahead of time saves you time later on, and more importantly, saves you that decision fatigue in the moment that we all know so well when you come home starving from work or from wherever you're coming from, and you're not going to make smart decisions in that moment. So
Mm.
yeah, I think that can often go a really long way.
Yeah, brilliant. One of the things that I love about doing this podcast is that I'm always learning as well. And lots of the topics I talk about, I know a lot about. I love chatting with guests who are the expert in it and so on. But I've just had a bit of an aha while we were talking about all of this. I don't think I've really thought or even recognised that much that I don't get those guilty feelings very often. I was going to say all the time, but actually, what's come up is when we were talking about intention and choosing something mindfully, since I've shifted into that over the past couple of years, especially because I'm making an intentional choice, I no longer feel guilty if over the weekend, say I did eat out and then I had some wine and then the next day we went for coffee and had cake, because I'm choosing to do that. But actually, there was a situation a few weeks ago where I was quite stressed. I was really tired and I'd planned something on my own. Everyone else was out for dinner that evening. And then I ended up, I can't remember what I ate, but I know that it wasn't healthy. I think I picked at different things. And then I did feel guilty because I just had fallen into that mindless trap of what's in the cupboard, what's in the fridge. Oh, now you've eaten that, let's have a bit of that. But that rarely happens now. And so that intention is really powerful. And I think when a lot of people start out with these new health goals, their mind is still trying to keep them where they've always been because it likes to use the habits it has for ease and saving energy and so on. But you're, as we're talking about consistency, you're not staying consistent because you aren't being intentional about what you're choosing. And so I think it's learning that. And then it does become so easy to make it fit in your lifestyle. You travel a lot, and I'm guessing that you still work out and exercise often, probably in the same kind of pattern, but maybe just in a different way, and that you can stick with your eating habits because you're intentional about who you want to be and what they mean to you. Is that something you do find works for you with traveling around a lot?
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I'm so big on routines as well, just as you are, and kind of like bookmarking the day with self-care items, as in not using your phone first thing or last thing in the day, or getting movement in and so on. And the reason I'm saying this is when life gets busy around us, when things are stressful, having those routines is so grounding, and no matter where I am. So yes, as you mentioned, Nicola, I am a digital nomad. I've traveled through to 53 countries in this world,
Wow.
and I love exploring the world. But no matter where I am, I feel at home, or I feel centered, because I stick with my non-negotiables. And I think once we determine them, it's so helpful. It really can always bring me back to who I am. However, creating them and creating new habits is, of course, easiest, and you're able to be most consistent when life is not so stressful. So, to
Yeah.
anyone listening, I would really recommend, like, if you want to establish a healthier eating pattern, or like working out and so on, creating the plan for that should always happen in a state where you're relaxed, where you're able to think clearly and not so influenced by everything around you. So maybe coming up with your food plan on a Thursday at 11 o'clock in the morning or at 5 o'clock in the afternoon where your kids want something from you and you're already stressed from the day, probably not the best idea. You're going to feel overwhelmed and automatically you're going to have a more negative association with it, as in just it's another thing I need to do. Whereas if you pick a time where you're okay, I'm kind of relaxed, the kids are doing this and that, I'm I could be scrolling on Netflix or scrolling somewhere, but instead I'm going to take these 20 minutes and thinking of what can I do in the next week to help me reach my goals. It goes a really, really long way, because yes, life will get busy and that is when it's harder. So pick a time. There's never a perfect time. I'm not saying that, absolutely not. But in your week or in your day, there is always times where you're more receptive to positive things or to put in the work into yourself. And if you can use that mindfully or wisely for planning, it's going to go a much longer way than if you try to squeeze that in somewhere where it's already busy, you're already feeling overwhelmed, and it's not going to be so fruitful.
Yeah, great advice. So just to wrap us up, I'd love you, and you've shared lots of brilliant insights and tips that we can definitely all think about and take some action from. But to wrap us up, I'd love to get 3 simple steps from you that someone can use to help them be consistent in whatever health area they want to try and make improvements.
Awesome. Yes. So, first step, in my opinion, would be to have realistic expectations and choose a path that is sustainable for you. So going back to the error number one that I usually see people make, it being too aggressive or being too much in an all or nothing mindset. Choose some simple things that you can stick with. Build your confidence in that way day by day. Step number two would be to get some form of accountability. The people around you in one way, shape, or form, whether it is through coaching, whether it is your partner, some girlfriends, or something like that. People that want to do it with you, and with that, audit your environment. And step number three was to create more mindfulness. So less multitasking, more single tasking throughout your day wherever you can. And again, start with one thing. Can just be just your breakfast, and keep your lunch and dinner the same, and do that consistently. If you're consistent with that next week, examine your lunch and add that to that, or it doesn't just have to be the meal times, anything really you would like. And I would add a fourth bonus, and that doesn't necessarily pertain to consistency, but just something that, in my opinion, goes the longest way when it comes to seeing nutritional changes without necessarily monitoring calories or so. And that is just focus on having more fiber and protein, so vegetables and fruit and protein, and thinking less about what you should not have or what you should cut out automatically by including more protein. And that can be plant-based protein or animal-based protein, whatever people like. But in general, that is really the big overarching theme that I see. People eat too many carbs and fats, and not enough protein and vegetables and fruit. So those would be the 4 things I want people to walk away with.
Oh, fantastic. And that last one is especially relevant for midlife women navigating perimenopause and menopause. We need to get the right protein in as well. That's, the natural protein, not the stuff out of packets. And again, we're not saying don't have that, but use it sporadically rather than for most of your meals. So yeah, fantastic advice, Lisa. So you have your own podcast as well, which I have just recorded a episode with Lisa on. So yeah, share where people can come and find out more about you and perhaps listen to some of your conversations.
Of course, Nicola, and thank you so much for having me on. It's been a true pleasure. So my podcast is the Nutrition and Life podcast, and my Instagram handles or LinkedIn handles, YouTube handle is Nutrition Coaching and Life. That's the name of the company, and we have a website with the same name as well. So if anyone is listening and finding me through this podcast, please send me a message and just let me know that you found me or heard me and Nicola speak. I always love to hear where people find me.
Yeah, and I encourage people to do that because, we're all taken out our time and energy to give this. And I know, like me, you love talking about it all, but it's really nice to hear from someone who has enjoyed the conversation, and especially if they share something that they're going to change on the back of it. And Lisa also has a free guide as well. So I'll pop all of the links into the show notes. Check them out. Say hi on one of her platforms, Instagram or LinkedIn. And yeah, take on board what we've talked about today. Lots of great advice. And as you know, I'm all about action taking, building those new habits, and you've got lots of stuff here to help do all of that. So thank you again, Lisa, for sharing everything that you've shared today. It's been really great chatting with you.
Thank you.